Hello and welcome to the Magic Guide for Lost Eidolons. I've absolutely fallen in love with this game, especially because of the combat, and magic is by far the most interesting part of combat in this game. We're going to dive into all the different types of magic, elemental, dark, and light, go through all the spells, and how best to use them. First off, I want to give you some of the most important things I've learned about magic in this game, from playing through it twice and really diving into the details for this video. The first thing is to use more than one of a elemental magic user. Specifically elemental magic, but this also can apply for light and dark magic. I think that one of the classic kind of things that people fall into with these tactical games is every class is supposed to fulfill a role, so I just want to have one of all the classes, and that way I'll cover my bases, and they think that that must be the best way to play, is to spread it evenly across all the classes. However, with magic in particular, having multiple elemental magic users on a team just absolutely skyrockets the value that you can get out of them. Being able to set up the water terrain and then also use the different elemental effects in the same turn is incredible at both dishing out damage through electric attacks and setting up the frozen status debuff with Blizzard or with, earlier in the game, just the single target spells to really be able to shut down enemies that are dangerous. This applies for any other class that you really enjoy when playing through the game. Do not feel like you can't have multiple of a class on your team. For me personally, I think that my biggest recommendation would be for elemental magic users. They are just incredible when using more than one. The next thing is to check your new grimoires that you get in storage in addition to checking out just on the equipment screen. Sadly, I think this is just a failing in the UI of the game, where one of the most important things that you can find on any spellbook is an imprinted spell, which is basically just an extra free spell on that spellbook specifically. But if you check in the elemental or in the equipment tab, it doesn't show you these. The only way you can see them is if you actually equip it and then go to the spellbook page, or if you're checking in storage, it will show you. As you can see in my example, I have a blazing elemental grimoire that gives me free 2 uses of Pillar of Fire, which is fantastic. I can use my actual spell slots for other higher tier spells and for the different elements. These imprinted spells come on a few different options throughout the game and are really, really powerful, much better than any of the other like +5 to crit or +5 to accuracy that you might get on other spellbooks. So keep an eye out for these. Whenever you get a new spellbook, I would check it in storage or equip it and then see if it has an imprinted spell. The last piece of advice is to get Vigilant Tread onto your spellcasters. So Vigilant Tread comes from the tier 2 priest class in the light magic line. And when you master that class, you get this equipable skill that decreases your character's aggro. It is fantastic on spell users because basically, as long as you are not directly adjacent to an enemy, they will almost always ignore you if there's somebody else in range. And this allows you to really not have to worry about the positioning of your spellcasters. You can even sneak them just around the sides of enemy units and get massive AoE attacks off, and not worry about the archers always focusing your spellcasters because they're in cloth armor, which they really prioritize focusing. This is a fantastic skill, definitely worth reclassing around to get it onto your spellcasters. And with these tips, you'll be able to better utilize your spellcasters throughout the game. Now let's dive into all of the different magics and how best to use them. Starting off with elemental magic because it's the best. There is a lot that goes into using elemental magic optimally and understanding how you can really decimate enemy armies with this. The first most important thing is the elemental types and how to use them. There are 5 main elements: wind, fire, water, electricity, and ice. Technically there is also earth, but not a lot of spells use that or fall into that category, and so I'm mostly just going to focus on the main 5. There's kind of a very easily understood interplay that these elements have with each other, with water being kind of your main setup element, where when you use a water spell on most terrains, it'll create a pool of water that drenches anyone who stands in it. And then from this drench status and wet ground, all of the other elements have some different effects. Electricity, you get a 20% damage bonus, and some of the damage will spread to any other wet tiles adjacent to the target. For ice, it will freeze anybody standing on wet terrain, and fire gets a minus 20% damage to anyone who is drenched or on wet terrain, but then it also dries up that water. It is also good to note that fire will melt any icy terrain or frozen enemies, but will not take a damage penalty for that. And then wind kind of sits on its own, where it doesn't really have any interplay depending on what type of terrain or elemental spells you've used on enemies prior. The other thing that kind of stands outside of the rest of them is that fire will set woods on fire, naturally, and then enemies will take damage over time when standing and starting their turn or ending after an action in those flaming squares. Water can be used also to put out those flaming squares. So that is the main way that the elements interplay with each other. Now we can get into the spells specifically. So when looking at the actual spells, I like to kind of categorize them into 3 different tiers of spells. You have tiers 1 through 3, where it's getting progressively stronger, more damage, generally more range as well, but less uses per battle. And then, of course, tier 3, you also get some AoE effects on a lot of the spells that is really, really powerful. And this tiering system is really useful to keep in mind because it's a good way to balance out how many spell uses you're going to have throughout the game. Most of the time, you basically can just stick on your strongest spells and you'll probably not run out by the time that a map is over. But on certain specific maps, including the very final map, they can really take some time and go on for a long, long time just dragging out the battle, and you will run out of your spells very quickly if you put all tier 3 spells on and don't have any tier 2 or tier 1 spells to kind of use as your filler spells. I really wish that there was just a non-limited durability spell that you could use as your basic attack, just like with combat arts and regular weapons, but it very rarely comes into play because you almost always will have enough spell uses on your stronger spells to last throughout an entire map. So with that, the tier 1 spells, most of them are just very short range, 1 to 2 range, and have just a small damage in their cast, and then use their elemental effect. So we have Fireball, Hydro Bomb, Tempest Wind, Thunderbolt, and Glacial Gale. So all of those follow just very exactly the elemental types of you get a single target spell that has 1 to 2 range and uses the element on that enemy. Tempest Wind, with wind being outside of the element interplay, gets 1 extra range, which is really nice. You will see that wind spells, instead of getting these kind of terrain or elemental benefits, generally just have longer range, sometimes more uses as well. Moving into the tier 2 spells, most of these now have up to 3 range, which is really nice, but they only have 3 uses per battle. And they also do more damage than the tier 1 spells. And in general, unless you know that the battle is going to be really dragged out, you're always wanting to replace your tier 1 spells with these tier 2s as soon as you unlock them. All spells will unlock based on the level of your elemental magic skill. In this kind of general spell list, there are some special cases that I will go over, but for all of these spells, as soon as you unlock them, it's generally worth it to upgrade, and then to just really utilize the extra damage and range whenever you can. 3 range is a very big deal because at this point that basically means that you will be able to attack without any counterattacks, even on archers or enemy mages. it is very powerful to have these 3 range spells, and they follow kind of the same elemental lineup, with the exception of Wind does not have a tier 2 spell. So we just have Cold Wave for Ice, Hydro Clone, Pillar Fire, and Storm Strike as the 4 main elemental spells. And then for tier 2, instead of a Wind spell, we get a very unique, the only like non-damaging elemental spell in Ice Wall, which just lets you create a 3-tile wide ice wall directly in front of you. And because it is only directly in front of you, I think that this is pretty useless, honestly. Obviously, with any of these utility spells, there will be ways that you can find uses for them, but very rarely. In fact, I don't think there is a single map where you're really needing a mage to hold a choke point by themselves where you would want to be using Ice Wall. You almost always have such a limited amount of options for enemies to reach you that your frontline units with their zones of control can cut off basically all enemies, especially the melee enemies, and that's where Ice Wall only having 1 range really falls apart, because any ranged enemy would still be able to attack you, just the same as if you were right behind your frontline units. And so if you could cast this at a further range out from you where you could actually block off all ranged units from attacking you as well, I could see it being a lot more useful. But as of now, Ice Wall is a pretty useless spell, and that wraps up the tier 2 spells. Now tier 3 is where we start having a lot of fun. We get the AoE spells for Ice, Fire, and Water. Sadly, Lightning does not get an AoE spell in the general spell list. There are a couple of other unique ways that you can do some pretty crazy lightning abilities and spells, but for now we just have Blizzard, Firestorm, and Torrential Rain. So Blizzard, being the AoE ice spell, is insanely powerful when used with Torrential Rain, because Torrential Rain, being the AoE water spell, you can create this 3x3 9 squares of wet terrain, and then use Blizzard and freeze those entire areas. And so depending on how strong your enemies are or what difficulty you're playing on, you can focus the same target for both of those spells and then probably kill that one target between your 2 mages on the same turn. But then you're also disabling up to 8 other enemies that are all within that ice area. And so it's just absolutely insane. And honestly, these 2 spells are the biggest reason why I think that elemental magic far outpaces dark magic in the end game, because dark magic has a lot of ways that you can shut down individual enemy units, but this is a way that you can shut down an entire group of enemy units and also slow down other enemy units that come later and do massive damage to all of them. Having 2 elemental magic users is just absolutely insane, because what's really nice is you only get 1 cast of each of these spells per battle. But when you're using 2 elemental magic users, you're wanting them to, one use Rain, one use Blizzard, and then you have the other spell still in reserve. So you can use this twice throughout a battle. And then Firestorm is only available to sorcerers once they have leveled up their class level, and it's pretty awesome as well. So one of the biggest issues with fire magic, in my opinion, is drenched terrain is a lot more common than being in the woods, and the wet terrain decreases your damage very significantly, and the drench status lasts even for the turn after somebody's out of the wet terrain. In order for the fire spells to really pull in their elemental worth, you're going to want to hit people in the woods and do the damage over time to them. However, most of the time with the single target spells, you're going to be trying to kill the unit that you're targeting the turn that you're using the spell. The single target fire spells obviously are still great for damage, great for a filler spot on your spell list, but Firestorm really shows its worth, because if you catch a group of enemies in the forest, then you can still kill your main target with Firestorm, and then everybody else around it will be taking the AoE damage from Firestorm, and will be taking damage at the start of their turn, so you can really rack up that AoE where you're almost doing half damage to an entire group of people from one spell. The other nice thing is that you get 1 extra range, so it's 2 to 4 range on Firestorm, as opposed to 2 to 3 range on Blizzard and Torrential Rain. So not only does it have that use when enemies are caught in the forests, but you can also use it to still be able to dish out major damage on a turn that you might not have been able to reach the enemy you're aiming for. So Firestorm specifically is a fantastic fire spell, but outside of that, I would generally recommend the water, electric, and ice spells as more important than the fire spells, unless you know that your map is going to have a lot of forests. So those are kind of the main AoE tier 3 spells. The last spell is Cyclone, which is our tier 3 wind spell, and again, you're getting that extra range and lack of elemental effects, but it can be really useful, and you're getting 2 uses on a tier 3 spell, which is pretty great. So I really like having a slot for Cyclone on most of my mages towards the end. Next up is the other offensive magic type, Dark Magic, and again, although I think it is worse than Elemental Magic, it still has a ton of fun options and unique things about it. And I'm just going to go through these spells alphabetically. First up, we have Abyssal Whisper, which is an incredibly useful spell, especially when you can look at the map and see how many mounted units there are. So this does +5 power to enemy mounted units, and I will say this spell gets a lot more use from enemies than it does on your side, because as soon as you get horses, you're going to always want to have one of your units be mounted. Enemy dark magic users are going to be able to hit your mounted units for the extra damage quite often. So it is annoying that it's probably more useful when used against you, but you can definitely use the explore option to check out a map, see how many mounted enemies there are, and see if it's worth it to grab this one. With it having 3 uses and 3 range, it is really nice to have that extra range on dark magic users because they don't have a lot of other great ranged spells. Or I guess extra range, I should say, for the 3 range. Obviously, most of the spells are 1 to 2 range. Next up, we have Dark Armor, which is a really cool option that Warlocks get as they are mastering their class, where they can cast it on themselves to decrease the physical damage they take and reflect damage back to enemies. I don't think that it's worth a spell slot, because very rarely are you going to want to expose your Warlocks to multiple physical attacking enemies, and they aren't really the best tanks anyway, and the biggest problem with dark magic is the lack of spell slots. It's not worth giving up a bunch of turns of offensive magic in order to have this very unique, interesting way to enemy phase do some damage, then run out of spells throughout the battle. It is interesting, you can use it to farm experience when doing like optional battles. There's lots of cool ways that you can use it to split aggro when enemy archers are going to attack you. It has its uses, but I don't think it's worth a spell slot, and you'll see that with a lot of these dark magic spells, where they're really useful, but only having 5 slots for both offensive and your utility spells feels a lot more limiting than elemental magic getting 5 slots just for offensive spells. Next up, we have Dark Arrow, which is our basic low damage, lots of uses, low range spell. Not too much to say there. Dark Burst is a fantastically powerful spell. This is absolutely amazing. This is also the only damaging AoE spell just right off doing damage that Dark gets, and it has the additional benefit of pushing enemy units away from the target. And so there's tons of ways that you can use this to reposition enemies, to make them vulnerable, to do the AoE damage. Just a fantastic endgame high tier spell that's really worth sticking on your Warlocks. Dark Grasp is up next, which is fantastic in immobilizing enemies. For Dark Grasp to really be useful, it's only on enemy melee units with no ranged options, and then you have to also make sure that there isn't an enemy priest within range of purifying this enemy. This spell is decent, but you'll find that you're really not just like rooting enemies all over the place and laughing as they can't do anything to you. And the next spell, Debilitation, is even worse, where it just decreases enemy movement by 2 for the next 2 turns. So again, you're not wanting a ton of situations where you're attacking an enemy with some of your strongest damaging units and leaving them alive for enemy phase. And then in this case, even if they're a melee unit, you're only able to use this from 2 spaces away. And so you're reducing their movement by 2, and they're still able to reach you on the next turn. And the only time that, that movement even comes into play is if you use it, they get hit, they come and attack you on the next turn, and then you just full on run away the turn after, and then they still have the decreased movement and they can't catch back up. Of course, you can have other situations where it might prevent them from reaching an ally of yours that they might be able to team up and kill with other units, but there's just so many other better spells to replace this with once you unlock them. After that is Expulsion, which is a very interesting status spell that is everything that those last 2 spells wish that they could do, where you have extra range, up to 4 range on it, and you're able to prevent an enemy from healing or attacking. Those are kind of the main things that you're wanting out of the status moves, is preventing enemy attacks and also preventing enemy healers from healing them. It can be used on allies, which is interesting, where you could save an ally's life with it. Next up is Lich Arrow, which is probably one of the better just standard spells that you're going to want to bring on most maps. With a power 3 and 3 uses, it is very solid, and then it also heals you for half the damage, which is really useful because most of the time your backline units that are squishier, like warlocks, will be the target of archers, but they generally aren't taking insane amount of damages every turn unless they're being focused by multiple enemies. So most of the time, Lich Arrow is enough to heal off whatever chip damage you took from the one-off enemy that was able to attack you, and it lets your healers focus on other people. So I really like Lich Arrow. It's a fantastic dark spell. Night Veil is my favorite dark spell. The boxes that this spell ticks off are fantastic. It's AoE, it can prevent enemies from attacking you, and it does damage over time. So this is just fantastic. You can cast it from 2 to 4 range, so you can get it from really far away, and then it does an AoE 3x3 tile. And within this fog, you have -2 movement and lose 8 health per turn. That is more than enough to cast on an enemy group that's approaching, make it so that they all went from being able to reach your units to now being short on movement, not being able to reach you. And then as they move through it, they're also taking damage for every turn. And on maps that you feel like you're gonna be overwhelmed or attacked from sides, on a lot of escape maps as you're escaping and enemy groups are coming in and attacking you, Night Veil can basically just shut down an entire group of enemies for an extra turn than you would have gotten. Night Veil is so cool. This is probably one of the best dark spells. I'd put it in top 3 for sure. Putrefy is where we start getting into very useful side effects to dark magic spells. So it doesn't have great power, you only get 2 uses per battle. It's lacking a lot of that. It still only has 1 to 2 range, but it decreases enemy physical defense by 5. So this is the greatest boss killing spell out there. When you have finished off all the boss's lackeys and you have, the next turn, all your units available to really just destroy this boss. You start off with Putrefy, and then you're just getting an extra 5 physical damage on all of your other units. So absolutely a fantastic spell. I would take this over most of the other immobilizing spells or other things like that, because hey, you could immobilize the enemy boss or a really tough enemy, but then if you want to have any of your physical attackers attack them, or melee attackers, the immobilization doesn't matter. Whereas Putrefy, you're able to, even on really strong enemies, put them down so that one of your melee units can come in and completely finish them off, kill them on their next attack, and then for bosses it lets you just dish out the crazy damage. Shadow Burst is the just 1 to 3 range standard option that can be used very similarly to Abyssal Whisper. So same range, same amount of uses, but Abyssal Whisper has 1 less power on all other enemies besides mounted units. If you think you're going to need 1 to 3 range spells a lot on your dark magic users, I'd take Shadow Burst and Abyssal Whisper. But if you see there's like 0 mounted units, you have other spells you want in the slots, Shadow Burst always wins out. Shroud Focus is another 1 to 3 range spell that's really useful, especially early on, which as you can see only a required mastery of 3, so I do think that this is worth it when you unlock it, but eventually can be replaced by better spells because it has, 1 power, 2 uses per battle. That's not great, but it does decrease enemies' magic power by 10. So if you have a really strong enemy magic unit that you're not going to be able to kill, you take out the front line, and then this just super decreases their damage, where again, like with the immobilization, if you're immobilizing them and they have the same range as you, then they're still able to attack and do a lot of damage back, whereas this will like just absolutely neuter the enemy's damage. So it can be very useful, and it is a really early 3 range spell that you get. Silence is a useful status spell on the dark magic, but again, I just don't think that there's enough slots to really justify its use. So you do get some massive range on it, which is really nice. Up to 6 range. Yep. So you can generally use it the turn before the enemies even get to your units, and then completely stop an enemy magic user from being able to attack. That can be really useful if you feel like you're not going to be able to survive the enemy's first push to you. But in most cases, when the enemies are first reaching your group, is generally the least dangerous turn, because they're just barely going to be able to be hitting into your frontline units, and hopefully they're all defended up and ready to go, and none of your units are really at risk anyway. And then on the following turn, if you're really wanting to use silence to just completely take away one of the enemy magic user's turn, then you also have all these other options that you could be using to possibly kill or finish off enemy units, open up the spaces so that one of your physical units can go and kill a magic unit instead of just silencing them for a turn. It's good, but again, I think that the status spells are slightly underpowered because of the lack of spell slots. Like, if you could just have all of the spells, then heck yeah, silence would be a go-to for every single battle, because you'll always be able to find a time to use it before the enemy engages you. But when it comes at the price of giving up one of your damage spell slots, I don't think it's worth it. Same thing with Somnolence. So this, instead of silence being just effective on enemy magic units, will put an enemy to sleep, which works on all types of enemies. However, sleep is slightly worse than silence because you're unable to attack that unit with other people without them waking up. So silence is really nice because you can silence your enemy and then just continuously attack them and they can't counterattack. It's really fantastic, whereas the sleep will wake up as soon as you attack them. But still, a good status spell, and the same thing I've said for all the other status spells applies to that one. So overall, pretty awesome options for the Dark Magic general book, but nothing too crazy, and I think it is slightly worse than Elemental Magic. Moving on to Light Magic, we again are going alphabetically and starting off with Binding Hill, which is a very useful situational spell. So, as I mentioned before, I've played through on normal and hard mode, and on hard mode I was using 2 Light Magic users basically on every map towards the end. And in those cases, Binding Hill becomes a little less, I feel like, useful, because you have just the 1 range heal on it, and you're basically just wanting to use it when you are hurt as the light magic user and one of your other units is hurt. But towards the end of the game, when you're unlocking this, it's required mastery of 10, and then if you have multiple light magic users, you're generally going to have enough AoE spells and other ways to heal all of them that you aren't needing to take this to heal yourself, and then you're able to have a lot more range and stay out of damage and not need to heal yourself too. And then the other thing that makes it a little less useful is that most of your light magic users will have gone through the priest class to unlock the vigilant tread that makes them less likely to be targeted, and that is very effective. So they aren't going to be taking a ton of damage anyway, possibly just from AoE spells and stuff like that. So most of the time you really aren't needing this Binding Hill, but if you're going through with just one light magic user, I definitely can recommend it, especially if they don't have a Vigilant Tread. Blessing is a fantastic way to remove debuffs from a group of your units. And this can be extremely useful when you're going through maps that have rivers or are going up against lots of enemy spellcasters, because just as I had mentioned in the elemental magic being an insanely strong combo, the blizzard spell freezing an entire group of units is insanely powerful. And when you have to cross through a river, if an enemy magic user comes and uses blizzard, that's basically a giant chunk, probably like half your army, that's just out of commission while frozen. And Blessing lets you hit all of them at once. So it's really useful. The biggest differentiation between this and just the standard single target Purify spell is that you only get +5 health for each negative effect removed on Blessing, whereas Purification you get +10 for each one removed. And so you probably aren't going to be healing all of your people back up to full if they got hit by a blizzard and took that AoE damage, but just being able to give them all their turns back is really effective, and it can be nice when you have your like front line that all gets taunted or has defense debuffs, drenched or frozen, and has those debuffs start stacking up. You can heal all of your frontline units at once and get lots of healing out of it. So really useful spell. I love Blessing, and you can also use it from further away than Purification, which is really nice. Divine Hand is, I think, one of the more useful status spells out there, or buff spells I guess you'd call them, where it's decreasing enemy magic damage by 30% on the target. And that is very significant. So just this spell, I think, is better than Silence from the Dark Magic. And you get 4 uses. You can use it on any turns that you don't have enemies approaching, and it lasts for 2 turns, so it's going to also have a longer lasting effect. And it's just really useful for taking away the power of enemy magic users and giving experience to your light magic users. Again, I also was running 2 light magic users on my hard mode playthrough, so I feel like I had more room to experiment with some of these other spells, where, being fair, if I had 2 dark magic users as main part of my team, I probably would have enjoyed the status effects more because I had more options at the time. Not the best spell, but I really liked this spell, and it's a very useful way to farm experience. Divine Protection, on the other hand, is a really crappy buff spell. So you're basically just making every single one of their attacks a taunting blow, where they will provoke the enemy and reduce their accuracy by 10, but most of the people that you would want to be using this on are going to have taunting blow anyway as an option that also gives them increased damage. And towards the end of the game, even the middle of the game to the end, basically most enemy units will be able to avoid being countered, besides the frontline units, which are the ones that you could reach with your taunting blow on player phase. So it's not like you're going to enemy phase be countering a bunch of people and provoking them and taking away their future turns. Possibly has some use on Templars since they get better ranged options, maybe on Eden as the Overlord, but you're not really going to be using this on archers and backline units to taunt enemies, and so I don't think that this spell is very worth it. Healing Light, on the other hand, is probably one of the best spells throughout the entire game, because you get it really early on, just level 6 mastery, and you get this massive ranged heal that I always forget Healing Light is the name of this, because I just always want to call it the Physics Staff from Fire Emblem, like one of the most useful staves that you can ever possibly get, and you can have this for almost all the game with 4 uses per battle, so it is fantastic. Definitely worth picking up as soon as you unlock it. Healing Touch is the basic heal, just 1 to 2 range, 6 uses per battle, which is fantastic, but yeah, solid spell. You'll definitely use it at the start of the game, eventually get replaced by better versions. Healing Wind is the spell that you unlock for the Bishop class as their insight spell, and it is amazing. The AoE spell with a power of 10. It's healing more than Healing Light and Healing Touch do. They only have power 5, and you're able to AoE heal your units, which is just amazing. Like, you can just get rid of all AoE damage that gets taken by a group. If you have 2 frontline units out by themselves, you can heal both of them at once with just 1 healer and do a massive amount of heal. It's really awesome. Holy Nova is a really useful offensive spell with having the 1 to 3 range and 3 uses per battle. Obviously, light magic, you're probably not going to be offensive most of the time, but it can be nice to have that extra unit in case finishing off a weakened enemy unit is going to save you a lot more than just having to heal your units and then take extra turns on your next one. Can be useful to have. I didn't run any offensive spells on my healers towards the end of the game, but I really liked Holy Nova for a while on my units of just really being able to decimate an entire enemy group. And then on your next turn as you're moving forward, you can heal off all the damage and have that nice coverage from your light magic users. Hymn of Healing is amazing. The strongest heal in the game at 15 power. So you're just going to give a massive amount of health back to units, which can be really nice to have, but it is just the 1 to 2 range. You do get 3 uses per battle, which is really nice. And so generally, I think that this is just the take over healing touch if you're running out of spaces, but again, there's nothing wrong with taking all of your healing spells and just having a lot of uses to farm experience. Light Arrow is your basic attack, just 1 to 2 range, nothing too special, 5 uses. Purification is the 1 to 2 range status heal, which is really nice to have, especially when you're going on maps with rivers and stuff like that, and before you get Blessing, but nothing too crazy there. Radiant Arrow is a fantastic healing option if you don't have other light magic users and if you aren't taking Vigilant Tread, but again, you're not likely to be in a lot of situations where your light magic user needs to heal themselves. And Sacred Calling, or the Rescue Staff basically, is an awesome spell that you can rescue an ally unit from far away and bring them next to you. So good for escape chapters and for chapters where you're going after different objectives and then you can pull an ally unit from far away over to you. It's really cool. Sanctuary is probably the most busted light spell in the game though. You get it when you fully master the light magic skill, and for 2 turns you're going to just have this 3x3 area that all units will take minus 20% physical damage and gain 15 health at the start of their next turn. So you can set it up before enemies reach you and then heal off basically all the damage and prevent more damage. Definitely one of the most busted spells in the game. And that sums it up for the light magic spells. Last up, we have probably the coolest section of spells, which I have deemed the unique spells, where all characters, as they're mastering their magic ranks, as well as the unique spell books, will come with spells that you can't get any other way, and they are some of the most powerful spells in the game, so they're really, really cool. First off, we have Bind, which Johanna and Eris both unlock as their unique spell. This is fantastic because with all the unique spells, you get them for free. You don't have to use any of your spell slots for them, and that's exactly what dark magic needs with its status spells, is more slots so that you can get enough of them to cover all of your options and still do damage. Bind is really great in that it gives you this 6 range just once per battle that you can completely stop an enemy from physically attacking. That is an excellent shutdown spell. I think that it helps, increase dark magic's usability a lot when you have these really great free spells that you're getting. Up next is Flash Hill, which is unique to Marshall. This is probably the worst out of all of the unique spells. It's a self-healing spell for 15 power, so as much power as Hymn of Healing has. And again, just like I talked about with other self-healing spells, most of the time between Vigilant Tread and being on the backline healing, your light magic users aren't taking a lot of damage. I think I used the spell once to see what it looked like and then never had to use it again the entire rest of the playthrough. So not the best of unique spells, but it is cool. Foible Burst, on the other hand, is probably in the S tier, top tier of all spells in the game. This is unique to Albrecht, and what's really unique about it is it gets its own symbol even. So it doesn't say that it's labeled as elemental, dark, or light magic, and I'm curious to know if you can unlock it on Albrecht by leveling up any of the magic skills. I personally had him in elemental magic to unlock it, so I know that that works. I'm not sure about the other ones, but it would be cool to test and find out. This spell is incredible because once per battle, you get this 1 to 3 range spell that decreases physical attack by 5 for 2 turns, and the power of this increases by 3 for every status effect. Or I guess debuff, I should say, because it doesn't include positive stat effects. So this is the best boss killing spell in the entire game. You reach the boss, You use your marksman, your other elemental magic users to get drenched. You use dark magic users to decrease their physical defense. That counts as a debuff. And then this just hits like a truck if you stacked up like 5 or more debuffs on it. It's just incredible. So this is definitely the top tier of all spells in the game. Mana Blast is Gilbert's unique spell that he gets, where very similar to Foible Burst, you just get this once per battle, 3 range, really powerful spell, and the big kind of effect on this is that the strength increases based on Gilbert's magic power. So the damage increase is just your magic power divided by 10, up to a maximum of 10. If you could possibly get to 100 magic, that'd be insane. And I love that they give you the formula. I love it when you can really see how much you're getting benefited by something. With that, this basically just becomes Gilbert's highest damage spell, probably the highest damage dark magic spell that you're going to get throughout the entire game, and it's just really good at dishing out that huge damage on bosses. Next up is Radiant Purification, which is the unique spell of the Book of Deeds, which is, the unique light magic spell book that you get through side quests. It is a fantastic spell, global range, clearing of all status effects with plus 10 health for each one removed. With this, you can just absolutely nullify an enemy team's turn, basically. Like, it is amazing, because generally you're going to have a lot of status debuffs spread across your units, whether that be from enemy mages doing their AoE spells, getting taunted, getting defense decreases. Towards the end of the game, you're going to have a lot of these debuffs, and you can basically just have a full team heal and get rid of all the debuffs once per battle. It's really, really powerful. I absolutely love this spell. Next up is Revivify, which is unique to Dane, one of the light magic users. And this is a really cool spell. It lasts for 3 turns, which is, I think, basically the longest buff spell in the game. It's when the unit takes an action. So whenever you use that unit, you get 20% health regen. And so this is really great for basically that unit, probably a frontline unit that's taking a little bit of chip damage, but it's not the main focus of enemies. It'll just keep them fully healed up throughout an engagement, and you can focus on other people. Really great spell. It's nice that you get it for free. So pretty awesome. The next unique spell is Sanctuary of Light from Eddie, one of the light magic users. And very similar to Flash Hill, I basically never use this. You can use this to remove all status effects on yourself, and then you're immune to status effects for the next 2 turns, which is nice, but the biggest status effects that are problems are going to be the ones that completely shut down your turn, like being frozen. And in those cases, you can't use this on yourself, so there aren't a ton of other status effects that it's worth giving up an entire turn of healing just to get rid of them on yourself. I basically never use this throughout my playthrough, but it's nice to know that it's there. The unique spell for the dark magic books is Shadowquake, which is really cool AoE spell. This is a 1 to 3 range spell that you will just randomly select targets and do basically 4 attacks at 30% strength. So you're getting 120% strength of your spell, and it is a 5 power spell, so it's really strong. But it's funny because with it being spread across random units, usually the most efficient way to do this is on as few enemy units as possible, because then you're really stacking up the damage and you can see and plan out better where it's going. So unless you're just surrounded by a ton of really low health enemy units and you're just going to try and snipe off a few of them as you're randomly selecting them for the spell, you've got pretty cool spell, but it's definitely weird and doesn't always feel like the best choice, whereas some of the other crazy strong damaging spells are like always your best damaging option. And I don't know if I mentioned, the Book of Malice is the name of the unique Dark Tome, and I will just say for this side quest, make sure you're always checking with your merchants in between chapters and talking with them if they have side quests. Last up is the Whirlwind spell from the unique elemental book, Book of Journeys. And this spell is insanely strong. You summon a whirlwind on one enemy, and then it bounces up to 2 times on other enemies within 2 tiles of the target. And sadly, this one does not hit the same unit more than once, so you're wanting to use it when there's at least 3 enemies. But man, it just does insane damage on all 3 of them, so it really helps you finish off multiple enemies in a turn, and is really, really powerful. And with that, we have finished going over all of the spells that I know of to this point in Lost Eidolons, and how good they are. If you disagree with me, or if I've missed any of these really cool spells, ways that you can use them, please let me know. I have had a blast playing this game, and magic has been a major reason for that. It is so cool in this game. I love the visuals, I love how powerful it is, and I hope that you all can enjoy the greatness that is magic in Lost Eidolon as well. Hope you have a great day.